Welcome, welcome. All right. All right, there we go. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to have you all here for today's webinar, which I've been very excited to host. We have two wonderful CODEPINK activists joining us today, Marcella and Michael. I am Megan, the campaign coordinator of the China is Not Our Enemy campaign. And last November, we embarked on a community trip to China. That took us through Shenzhen up to the Jiangxi province, through Ruijin and around smaller villages in the area, over to Shanghai and up to Beijing. And our two guests, Marcella and Michael, we had the fortunate experience to have them come along with us as two amazing, intelligent, China smart people. And so I'm really excited to have them here today to talk to us about their experiences, and especially in Ruijin. So without further ado, I will turn it over to them, and feel free, anybody, to introduce yourself in the chat and also put questions in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of their presentation. So handing it over to you, Marcella and Michael.
Well, I'm so excited to be here and talking about this. I'm Marcella, and I'm in Austin. I've probably met a bunch of you at this point. But yeah, I think me and Michael we both really connected with this place kind of unexpectedly. And along with, everybody else, all the other wonderful people who came with us on this trip. So I'm just really excited to share my experiences with you all, and hopefully we can increase the understanding and get to know a little bit more about China tonight. Michael, you want to go introduce yourself now?
Yes. I'm Michael Snowfikeman. I was on this trip to China in November, and I'm excited about doing this because the kind of historical part of the trip I found that especially moving, and in some ways had the most profound effect upon me. And only later did I find out that's actually what they've kind of designed it to do, in terms of what's called red tourism in China. And I think that's kind of incredible that I feel like I ended up being involved in something that was designed for other Chinese, but I was very fortunate to get to participate in it. And I learned a lot from doing so.
Cool. So I'm just going to take us through. I have just a really brief little slideshow I just wanted to put up just to help with people's kind of understanding of what we're talking about, because this is like a history, China's red history that, we just don't really learn about in the US very much. So here's just a little photo of all of us, if it will let me go to the next photo. This is all of us on our first day in Ruijin, in front of Mao and some of the other soldiers and compatriots. And here's just a brief kind of timeline. We're going to be focusing on, of course, Ruijin, and which is where the the Communist Party of China established their base before doing the Long March. But I just really wanted to quickly go through kind of some of the other stuff. I'll talk about start off just talking about the century of humiliation briefly, because it's really important to kind of understanding all this other stuff that comes after and understanding where China is today. So before the 1900s, China was, of course, ruled by the Qing dynasty. The Manchus from Manchuria, were the dominant group in China, and they ruled from the 1640s all the way till 1911. And essentially, they were by the time of like the 1700s, they were a very weakened regime. So they basically cut off trade for the most part, except for in this one place, Canton, which is modern day Guangzhou. Um, so European traders they were very suspicious of, rightly, they only let them trade part of the year. And this really bothered, the British, for instance, who uh, wanted basically a free market. They wanted free reign in China. And they were smuggling in opium, which was illegal. And eventually they went to war essentially to open up this market. And then in the 1842, after the conclusion of the First Opium War, they actually, and also all of this is to say they were trying to essentially decrease the the trade imbalance because they really didn't have anything to offer China and the East in general. The Europeans were like just the loving all of the goods coming from China, and they couldn't really offer anything except drugs to them, which were illegal. So they signed the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, and that started the Century of Humiliation. So the Century of Humiliation was defined by a domination, not all-out colonization, but domination by outside powers as well as by the local landlord class. So essentially, China was split up into different spheres of influence by the British, the French, the Germans, and also the Americans, interestingly. So, we get to the late 1800s. There starts to be some social reformers who are coming into prominence, and they ended up being the people who led the 1911 revolution. And I think Michael was going to talk a little bit about that and the May 4th movement.
Oh, Michael, I think you're on mute.
There we are. Okay. Yes, I'm going to try to provide a basic historical framework for the history of China from the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911 to the proclamation of the People's Republic of China in 1949 in 7 minutes. I'm going to read it because that gives me the best chance I'll actually get it done. Many of you already know these things, but many here may not. It's hard for us to imagine the depth of the crisis China faced in these fateful years. In these fateful 48 years. The overthrow and collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911 was also the collapse of a 2,000-year-old imperial system. This collapse was the product of the century of humiliation that Marcella just outlined, which was all about the destruction of Chinese sovereignty under the violent pressure of the foreign imperial powers.
Raise your pace up a little bit.
Yeah. Who sought to exploit China's vulnerability for their own gain. What was China's weakness? The Qing dynasty had failed. The Qing dynasty had failed to modernize China enough to be able to resist the industrialized weaponry and economic power wielded by the British, American, and other empires, including Japan, which had succeeded in modernizing its economy and military. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 had a profound effect on Chinese intellectuals desperately seeking a path forward for China. To many Chinese, the Bolshevik Revolution demonstrated the possibility of radical change in China that could address the problem of sovereignty by opening up a path out of a hopelessly antiquated imperial system and into a modern industrialized society. Marxist-Leninism provided a method for achieving this goal. Reading and study groups on Marxism, Leninism sprang up across China. Mao was part of one in Beijing. Lenin, in particular, had emphasized the possibility of a socialist, anti-imperialist revolution in the colonized and semi-colonized regions of the world, in countries like China. The Soviet Union was also willing to help China create a communist party, and they sent advisors and organizers and other forms of support. The May 4th movement took place in that period in 1919. It was a response to the decision of the victorious great powers at Versailles to give Japan control of the Chinese territories that had seized from Germany during World War I. The Chinese government was so weak and submitted to this humiliating treatment. Thousands of students and faculty vigorously denounced this failure to defend Chinese sovereignty and burned down the Chinese foreign ministry in Beijing. The police savagely beat and arrested the protesters, but the community responded by supporting the students. This movement began a wave of activism that fed into the formation of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921. The Soviets advised the CCP to become part of the Nationalist Party, a national bourgeois party of Sun Yat-sen, who had been the leader of the movement to create a Western-style republic in China. Communist activists gained valuable organizing and military experience and training in their work in the Nationalist Party. But this alliance ended tragically when Chiang Kai-shek, its anti-communist leader, after Sun Yat-sen died, betrayed the communists with his violent suppression of the Communist Workers' Revolt in Shanghai, in which thousands of workers were executed or imprisoned. This was a crushing blow to the CCP. Nationalist repression made it nearly impossible for the CCP to organize in the cities, which had been the primary strategy of the CCP under the influence of the Soviets, who argued that the revolution had to be based on the urban proletariat. Mao had done extensive peasant organizing. He was already arguing that given the fact that China was more than 90% peasants, that they were the revolutionary force needed. Ultimately, the CCP would come to adopt Mao's peasant-based strategy, and the creation of the Ruijin Soviet with its capital in Ruijin was a concrete step in that direction. It was in Ruijin, with perhaps 10 million people, that the peasant-based strategy centered on land for the peasantry and people's war began to become dominant. Chiang Kai-shek launched 5 extermination campaigns against the Shanxi Soviet. The first 4 campaigns failed, defeated by the mobile guerrilla tactics of People's War. But for the 5th campaign, Chiang Kai-shek amassed an army of 750,000 men and a different and more effective tactic involving slow encirclement of a ring of forts. The Red Army in Ruijin had to leave, and so began the Long March. They broke through the nationalist lines and began a 6,000-mile march to the secure area of Yunnan in the northeast of China. They had to cross high-altitude, snowy mountains and freezing temperatures, deadly marshes that swallowed the marchers whole, and fight off constant attacks from nationalist troops and hostile warlords. In a heroic and desperate move, Red soldiers defied machine gun fire to capture a suspension bridge crossing a deep gorge with its planks removed. 100,000 Red soldiers had started on the march. 10,000 survived. But Mao said that they were pure gold. They had developed incredible determination and solidarity. The communist movement was able to rebuild with the others they joined in Yunnan in the north. It was from this base the Red Army fought its guerrilla war against Japan as part of the Second United Front that was eventually formed again with the nationalists. When Japan was defeated in 1945, civil war soon returned, and the Red Army, with its effective political program based on the peasantry and People's War, was able to prevail over the nationalists, who utterly lacked popular support. As Mao said at the founding of the PRC, China had stood up.
So this is kind of the historical context we wanted to provide because, like I was saying before, this is really the history of the Chinese Soviet Republic is not exactly something that we grew up learning about in the US. It's not even really something I was aware of until I went to China. But so basically it ended up being, funnily enough, like the most probably impactful part of this trip. So this was from the first day we were in Ruijin. You can see here, I just selected a few of the photos. from this first day. Over here, this is the din, I believe is how I say this. It's the tripod pot that ancient Chinese used for cooking food. And it's supposed to symbolize power and, base human need, obviously, in food. And then we basically you walk down, from here to the path down to the museum, which is, oh, sorry. Oops. You go back down to down this path, and then this huge museum is right there, and that's the Museum of the Chinese Soviet Republic. And in there, we were brought around by our tour guide, Charlie, who was just so fantastic. I really can't say enough good about him. He was just, he was a local from the same area of Ruijin. And talking to him about all of these events, basically in Ruijin, like Michael was talking about, this was the base of the Chinese Communist Party. So they had to were forced to retreat there because they were getting killed in the cities, in Shanghai, where they had previously been the strongest. So they were forced to retreat there. And Ruijin, I should say, is in the south. I have a little map at the end. Ruijin is right down here in Shaanxi province. And this is the route they took on the long march over here. And then if you can see, Shanghai is over here, Beijing over here for context. So, we were on this we had just flown in from Hong Kong. We went to Shanghai, or we went to Shenzhen for the first night, and then we basically drove up here. And yeah, this museum was very, very interesting. They had these different little, like, I guess, like scenes of Mao meeting with the different leadership of the Communist Party of China, deciding, how they were gonna beat back the Nationalist Party, who were, constantly bombarding them, as we learned. They were, just because they had retreated from the cities didn't mean that they were free from attack. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Michael, for this first day at the
Well,
museum.
I only learned later that the Ruijin was the capital, and they also refer to it as the Shaanxi Soviet, and that refers to it covered a very large area and included about 10 million people. And I didn't realize that when I was at the museum itself, which we're going to be looking at soon, or at the recreation, historical recreation, because I was sort of astonished with how well organized they were with their various government offices and so on. But I think if you had a government that included 10 million people, you'd certainly have to be well organized and have that kind of setup. I think it's just it is hard. We have to get into the reality of the time, because China just was not really. It really wasn't. The central government really wasn't in control of all of China, and so such a huge country that a
Did we lose Michael?
I think we might have for a second. Sorry, guys. I mean, I think, uh, should we wait for him? Yeah, I think are you back, Michael?
Michael, are you there? If you want to just keep going, we can circle back.
Okay. Yeah, I think he was talking about the weakness of the Chinese government at this point. you know, especially after the revolution. They were very decentralized. There were still a lot of warlords who controlled huge portions of China, and they were fighting with one another. They were fighting with the nationalists, and you know, it was not as if this is like them fighting against a centralized state. So I think that that's part of what, you know, Michael was trying to get into there. Let me just, if I can go to the next kind of section. So this was on our second day. This was really exciting. We went to, this is it kind of sounds like, I don't know, it's one of those things that kind of didn't sound the most exciting, but this day was so like important for me personally. So we went to, this was basically the recreations of all the different ministries. So, you know, the Chinese Soviet.
Video, put the voice on when you want to talk, Michael.
Oh, I think we've got Michael back. Anyway, I was just talking about how they basically this was their capital for the Chinese Soviet Republic, and these are all the ministry buildings. They had the Department of Labor or Land Reform, you know, all the different uh kind of ministries that you'd expect with like a government. So it was like a proper functioning state in some ways. It was just very small and localized to this one province. But as you can see, this is one of the ministry buildings here in the middle. Essentially, they were made just like Chinese houses, like small little homes that they would run the government out of. And this in Chinese construction, they had like a hole in the middle of the ceiling, and then this little basin would be filled with water, which represents money traditionally in China. Um, but yeah, I gotta say this part. Oh, and we also met with a bunch of little school children. There must have been like 100 of them who were touring this whole area, and they were so excited to meet us. I think Michael and I were talking about yesterday how these kids like this is a more rural province, like he was saying. This is not you know, a super touristy area. So they were just like super excited to meet us, and it just made me feel very positive and optimistic. And it was just cool to, they all wanted to take photos with us. And that was just super fun. Did you want to talk a little bit now that you're back, Michael?
Yeah, well, I just think that the whole, you know, especially the areas where they did historical restoration, just creates a whole new dimension to the experience of it that's different from, say, a museum or a book in particular. And I think it ends up having a much more emotional impact. And some people have compared it to like a pilgrimage or some kind of sacred site. And that, you know, why do people bother to have those? Well, I've never really understood that. I've never gotten into going on a pilgrimage or going to, say, you know, the springs at Lourdes or anything like that. But this particular pilgrimage had a really profound effect on me. It had the effect that pilgrimages are supposed to have, which is to affect you on a deep emotional level and connect to feel that it's something real. And I didn't quite realize it, you know, because it is like wooden mannequins, and you know that it's reconstructed, but it still had that effect. And I think it's very interesting because this is one of the ways that China is trying to preserve the spirit of the revolution. And they talk about it in that language. They talk about the spirit of the party, which apparently is a concept that originally came from Lenin. And oddly, that's kind of what I felt I experienced there, which is kind of strange because I'm not Chinese. But they gave me enough of a sense of the profundity of what was happening here, because this People's Soviet, the whole approach that they took in the revolution was to make the revolution in the process of struggling for its victory. And so they were doing land reform and overturning class relationships and gender relationships and the relationship of the young to the old. All these things were being done in the with and in the population of this area. And it was directly related to their military effort, because by distributing land and making these changes, they created highly motivated soldiers that wanted to defend and further the revolution. And we've never really had anything quite like that in the United States. And one of the things that's really unique about it is that it is a peasant-based revolution. And to me, that has a certain special power to it that affects me deeply, I think, in terms of my own ancestry, because my ancestors were peasants, like probably all the rest of you. That's probably generally true. And they struggled for justice many centuries in the Middle Ages with, one peasant revolt after another, and were brutally put down, although some had some success. But I think all of us, there's kind of a collective amnesia among Americans that we don't remember our European roots. Not all of us are from Europe, but some of us are. And I think that's too bad. And in some respects, it took a Chinese uh, uh, reconstructed historical site to jog that memory in me.
Yeah, I felt very similarly for sure about that. I just wanted to point out this one building. I can't remember what this was called, but this was essentially like a meeting house in the style of the like actual USSR buildings. Like Michael talked about a little bit, like the Soviet Union was involved with China at this point. They had sent down advisors through the Comintern, and there was quite a bit of, as they talked about in the museum, there was quite a bit of conflict between the two groups, unfortunately. But this building, what was pretty interesting about it, you can go inside, and there were more kind of wax sculptures, and there's seating, and you can kind of see what it would have been like. But there's like 9, 10 different doors, and what we were told was that when the GMD, when the Kuomintang, who are the Nationalist Party, when they were bombing this area, people could run out quickly. So that just gives you a sense of just how under threat the party was at this time. Very, very, insecure. But
Well,
yeah, no, go
yeah.
on. What is it?
Well, the Nationalist Party actually launched 4 extermination campaigns. That's the term they used for it. And all 4 of those failed because of the guerrilla tactics and the People's Army tactics that Mao used, or but on the 5th extermination campaign, Chiang Kai-shek massed an army of 750,000 men and he had a German advisor that gave him a different strategy, which was to build forts. And very slowly, it took weeks and weeks, encircled the Ruijin, and then kept tightening the circle more and more and more. And it was difficult to use their normal approaches with that. And that's one of the reasons why they had to get out of there, because the technique was actually working. But they had to find, I think they sent one group to kind of attack one area of the encirclement as a diversion. And then the main body of the army broke through the lines elsewhere. And they, so, yeah.
Yeah, in that case, I think it'd be good to move on to the Long March for sure, because that's another piece here that is just so important to understand. But just first, I just looking at walking through all these ministries, looking at these different little buildings. They had like the picture of Lenin and Marx on the wall, and they had the seating, and it just feels like, man, it's like it should be corny, it should be cheesy, but it made the revolution feel so tangible and real.
Mm-hmm.
And these buildings, I'm telling you, they're just so humble. It's like, yeah, it's like being in like a little house. But this is where they did it. And all these men, this small group of people came together, and they changed the lives of what would be over 1 billion people now. I mean, and it's just unbelievable to think about that this is where it started. So I just was extremely humbled by that aspect of it. But I just wanted to move on. So we have a little bit of time to talk about the Long March, and then we can kind of do like a little Q&A. Also, yeah, I just wanted to mention this, the well really quick. So like we were talking about, like they were literally doing land reform. They were teaching people how to read. They were telling women, you can choose your husband. They called it marriage freedom. You can choose your husband. You don't have to bind your feet anymore. And they also did things like they built wells for the peasants so that they could have their own water. So I just found that it's very profound. It kind of reminds me of the Cuban Revolution in some ways, that they were doing the work as they were, going around and, recruiting people and teaching them about what you can be free. You don't have to live an existence of domination. I found that extremely important and interesting. So this was the next day we went to, this is not in Ruijin. This was in, I think Yudu was the town.
Mm-hmm.
This was at the Museum of the Long March. As you can see, the first photo and the second one are in the museum. This first one is actually made up of sandals that the people on the Long March would have been wearing. This is a Chinese flag made out of those sandals that people wore as they were walking through 11 different provinces, as they were, walking up mountains and swamps. You can only imagine, the conditions that they were living in. And this is, again, our wonderful tour guide, Charlie, telling us about all this history. And then after we went through the museum, we happened to come across this production. They were doing a recreation of the people leaving, the Red Army leaving on the Long March. So it was actually, again, you just like, okay, that sounds a little bit whatever. It made me tear up. It was very it just made it tangible and real, and it was very sweet. I don't know, and impactful, and tough to watch in some ways.
Charlie shared with us, I don't know if this was mentioned or not, because I was gone part of the time here, dealing with a computer. But Charlie said that he actually didn't like these events being just glorified because they lost so many people. There were so many people who never came back. And that really affected me because, sometimes when you're looking at great historic events, you lose sight of the price that was paid in terms of the lives lost and how that affected individual people. And Charlie's comment really made me tune into that fact, that what is extraordinary about the spirit that was present here is that it was an incredible spirit of self-sacrifice, of determination, and of vision, and a spirit of incredible intelligence. Because I've been reading a book called Foundations of Mao Zedong's Thought, and it's all these letters that Mao wrote and everything else, but you can see the constant process of correcting the approaches that they were taking as they, in very practical terms, experimented with different approaches and learned from it. And so, I think that's something for us to learn from and to understand how crucial that is to any major transformation of society.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just, yeah, it's just, yeah, the human spirit, the power of the human spirit really comes through with these, these different stories. I mean, with the Long March, there's just no other military expedition quite like it in all of human history. It's really something to behold. And it wasn't just men. They had actually in the play that we watched, one of the people who in the Red Army who went out was a mother who was saying goodbye to her child. So this had a huge impact on and most of the people never who went out on this march, never came back.
There were 100,000 people who left, and only 10,000 arrived in Yunnan province in the north, which was their destination.
Right. Yeah,
But apparently they ended up providing a very powerful core of leadership with the Red Army, because they had been so their determination had been so tested, and they had developed such strong bonds of solidarity as a result.
right. Yeah, and I just go back to if anyone wants to kind of see the map again. Um, yeah, I think that definitely what you were talking about in terms of we don't have a revolution to look back on. We don't have, or, we have a bourgeois revolution, not exactly.
Yes.
We have a exclusionary revolution that, of course, just by its nature, not everybody can identify with. But this really, yeah, it does. And even if we had one, this is so much more recent, like within a couple generations, people really do have a memory
Yeah.
of they have a memory of all of these events in China,
Well,
and
I think,
yeah.
yeah. Well, one of the effects it had on me, I think, to put it in a succinct phrase, is it completely blew my Eurocentrism out of the water. And I think people that are from Europe and European Americans and so on have this view that the French Revolution or the American Revolution, that's the center of human history. That's the decisive revolutionary moment for the history of humanity. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that that's true.
Mm.
And because of the depth of the Chinese Revolution, the fact that it was a revolution that really came from the bottom of society and from the peasants in a way that no revolution in the West ever did. Certainly neither the French Revolution or the American Revolution had that character. And it's interesting to me that the Chinese have decided with their rural revitalization program to begin to limit and reduce migration to the cities and instead revitalize the rural regions. And I think that's part of the overall project of an ecological civilization, is that you have to have people in contact with the land that treat the land in an ecological and respectful way. And so, maybe people think that the peasant culture has been defeated by modernization, liberalism, and individualism. But I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that the peasant culture has something that we all need, that is an antidote, that's to our excessively individualistic society. And I know that Xi Jinping, in talking about the civilization, the strategic civilization initiative. I'm not sure if I'm getting it right, but he was talking about it, and he referred to the Ubuntu philosophy of Africa. That rather than saying, I think, therefore I am, instead it says, I am because you are. And I think that that's what was so powerful about the spirit that we contacted there and connected with. And I think it's very important to realize the spiritual dimension of revolutionary work. And I think that this was a good learning experience, because I have felt that before, but I've always felt it as if I was more trapped in the Western framework, where in this instance, it feels like there was a path forward to liberation from it. And that's a very hopeful change for me. And I would hope for all of us.
Yeah, I just think it's so, more than anything, regardless of how you, feel about, China, whatever, like, how unfortunate is it that we've had this whole experiment, incredible experiment, totally closed off to us in terms of
Mm-hmm.
appreciating it, in terms of appreciating, what it's done for so many people, just talking to Charlie, our tour guide again. I mean, like, they had this, you know, not just the century of humiliation, not just the, fighting with the nationalists who didn't just, kill communists, to be clear. They, went out of their way to kill plenty of peasants who weren't involved either. But they, but and then you had the Japanese who we don't even learn about this history, but they killed an incredible amount of Chinese people in World War II as well, like 26 million or so. And like a second Holocaust essentially. Um but you get the sense through talking to people like Charlie that you know they've had their revolution, they don't want to have it again. They've fought their battles and they just want a peaceful existence. They are they understand what conflict is. In the West, especially in the US, we fetishize war, because most of us are not impacted by it. But
Mm-hmm.
Chinese people understand war, and that's why they don't go to war. That's why they haven't been involved in a war in over half a century at this point, I believe. So and I agree. I just felt like, I had already out of love with our country, let's just say, for a long time. But this really, put the nail in the coffin, I would say. It
Yeah.
really helped me break out of, all the, kind of, not all of it, I'm sure, but, a lot of the kind of baggage that I was still carrying around from having been socialized in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I grew up in a very conservative household, very, very Republican, and very much into the American civil religion. And some people have talked about this as being the civil religion of China. But I think I became very alienated from the American civil religion. And I'll tell you why. Because it's manifest destiny, which is civil religion of your own country at the expense of the civil religions of other countries. And that just doesn't work. And, I grew up during the time of the Vietnam War, which kind of dramatically exemplified that America couldn't just live and let live with other countries, that its religion was an aggressive religion that required for its fulfillment the domination of other peoples. And I've just fundamentally rejected that to the deepest core of my being. And I think that it's interesting to find a civil religion that is welcoming to the rest of humanity rather than seeking to dominate and exploit it.
Definitely. On that point, I think if we want to move into some Q&A, I haven't really been looking at the chat, so I don't know if there's any questions there already. Let me see.
I'm not sure. I think there might have been one about, was Ruijin staffed, or did you have to self-guide yourself around the area, and how were you able to understand the meaning of things?
Well,
Charlie
yeah, mostly
guided
our
us
own
on
guide.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a local guide, Charlie, which as far as I'm concerned, if you're going there as a foreigner, you're probably going to need, a tour guide. Like,
Well, it's nice too, because it's an opportunity to develop a relationship with one of the locals. Because we kind of did with Charlie. Charlie was really outgoing and really shared his feelings and perspectives. He was a great singer. He did a great rendition of "Blowing in the Wind." Do you remember that?
That was great. And he did he did an opera song as well. That was
Yeah, he had a great voice.
yeah.
Charlie was awesome. So I'd recommend any guide like Charlie. I would
Yeah, and
recommend.
you guys can get Charlie then.
Yeah,
Um
it's just.
try to get CODEPINK to connect everybody. Um but yeah,
There you go.
it was mostly through him for sure. I think we probably would have been pretty lost. Because like we were talking about, these are like exhibits and monuments created for Chinese people. You know, like you need a Chinese person to help you interpret everything. Great. Anybody
The
else want to ask a question? Just raise a hand or are there, it looks like someone has a raise. Oh,
John,
John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was able to visit Sun Yi, which is the next big place on the Long March, but and that was in 2015, and at that time the museum had everything in Chinese. There was nothing in English. And we didn't have any guides to hire, so we did employ somebody from the Chinese Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. But I just wanted to talk about some of the mechanics of this. How did you find Charlie? Where did you all stay? How much did it cost? Some of the mechanics that we need to be able to do some of these things ourselves.
Yeah, we went through CodePink totally because so I signed up for this trip partly because I didn't want to have to plan it myself. So that a lot of this was it's hard for me to say specifically what costs what amount of money.
I think
Um,
the hotels were, I think, incredibly cheap,
they were.
considering that they were almost obscenely luxurious. I mean, I have never been in hotels like that in my entire life. Yeah, they
Yeah.
were really affordable. I mean, I
Yeah.
believe that. I think that's why they were used, but they were, like marble and all kinds of, they were incredible hotels with amazing food. I mean, we really got spoiled.
The food, I could talk about the food all day. But yeah, I don't think I could get into specifics with a lot of this stuff, but I do
I do have
everything that we figured out, it was pretty cheap, I think.
Yeah, if you're very curious about the breakdown of the cost, I can you can send me an email and I can give you those specifics. But we had another question from Michael who says, how have you been able to take what you have learned on the trip to help people in the US understand that China is not our enemy?
Mm.
Well, I've been kind of working on that. And some of the work has been to just further reading and investigation about China. And I think that I found the Code Pink book club on China to be very helpful in that regard. But I'm still feeling my way towards how to talk about this to Americans. And I feel like this webinar has helped me to do that. It's forced me to do that, and it's forced me to, come out of my closet because I mean, this is not that easy to talk about to Americans, but I don't know. I think a big part of it is just that if you come to know another people and their civilization and to love and appreciate it, then you're going to want to defend what you love. And I think if you can communicate that love to other people, they'll wonder where it's coming from and communicate the hope that it gives you. They'll wonder where that's coming from, and maybe they won't want to destroy it.
I think that's really key. When people see that you are passionate and you care about something and you have a personal experience with that thing, whatever it might be, people will, not always, but they'll start to wonder, hey, maybe there's something to that, So just being open, just like saying to people, like, you don't have to agree with me on this, but try to be open-minded and just, you know, talk, us just talking about our experience, I think goes a long way, honestly. From me having talked to people. Um, Scenes in the museum. Well, there were we have pictures of both of the museums I talked about. I just showed a few of them. If you want, I can put those back up on the screen. really quick if I can remember how to do this. Earl, so most of our time, we spent I think 3 days in Ruijin, 3 nights at least, in Ruijin. And then that's what we're focusing on in this webinar. But we did do another one where we talked about the whole trip, which is where we flew into Hong Kong, went to Shenzhen, 3 nights there, and then a night in Ganju. Then we went up to Shanghai and then Beijing. So we spent
that webinar has a number of other people that were on the trip in it besides Marcella and I, right?
So we spent like half the time in the south, half the time in the north, maybe a little bit more time in the north. But yeah, I can go back to the photos really quick. I mean, we just don't have a ton of them inside the museum, but if you do want to see more, we have a lot more photos, I think, that we showed too in the first webinar. So and that's posted on YouTube, so I would definitely check that out. Oh yeah, that link just got sent in the chat.
I just wanted to mention that one interesting analogy, perhaps, to the Long March. And one of the first times that I found out about the Long March was when I was like 19 or 20. I read an article, and it compared the Long March to the Exodus. And I think that's a very interesting comparison. And the Exodus ends up being kind of a paradigm. It becomes this way of relating to the world for the Jewish people, and then later for Christianity. And I think that is one of the things that the Long March and the Red History, the way that they're trying to put it forward in a way that the Chinese people can appropriate as something that accompanies their history. Because even if you aren't in the heroic phase of a revolution, you still have to struggle, you still have to work, you still have to sacrifice, you still have to have vision, you have to have faith and determination. And you need sources for that. And I think this is one way of doing that. And I think it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think so much of what we've talked about, like China's domination and then resilience through its domination by foreign powers and landlords, and all this history, like it's kind of no wonder that so many countries in the world that have experienced something similar would prefer to do business with China, or would prefer to have relations with China over the US, that likes to say, it's our way or the highway. That's something that really struck me, because I lived in South Africa for a couple years, and they're really, like, talking to people there is really what got me interested in China in the first place. They relate to China. They feel a lot of people there feel a much stronger kinship with China than you might expect. So that definitely was interesting. And I think for a lot of people in the world, colonized people, or people who are just dominated by outside powers, I think connecting struggles, kind of like a little bit of what we're doing here, it's much more intuitive for them. And I've felt ever since I've gotten back that's been, I think, an important part of what I've been trying to do, is just, let's try to make it intuitive for people, like, you suffer the way that I suffer, like, it's solidarity. It's the most basic thing in the world. But our culture, which is so dominated by hyper individualism, has beat that out of our heads. So I think traveling, especially connecting with people in other countries, especially people with this kind of revolutionary heritage, it does a lot. It goes a long way, I think, in contributing to your, understanding of the world.
Well, I think the US right now, with its backing of Israel's genocide in Gaza, is saying something about the spirit that is driving it. And I think it's something that the people of the global South are very familiar with, more familiar with than they want to be. And they have deep memories and even present realities that that resonate in a negative way with what's happening in Gaza. And it's a shameful thing for Americans to be that attached, connected to a genocidal spirit.
I'm trying to see if there's, I think somebody had their hand up, but now I'm not seeing their hand.
Kenny has their hand up.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Well, thank you so much for doing this webinar, and it's fascinating in terms of Ruijin, the places you visited. It's amazing. I have never been there. I just want to share something as well as ask a question. So last year, I was in China from March to May for 2 months, and I would actually travel all by myself all the way to Xinjiang to see with my own eyes in terms of the quote unquote genocide that's going on in Xinjiang, allegedly by the US. And, all I saw was just different nationalities, the Uyghurs, the Kazakhs, the Mongolians, the Han, all living in harmony and just flourishing. And I didn't see any signs of brutality or anything. So one thing that I try to do is sometimes people just say, "Oh yeah, but what about all the surveillance and everything in China?" So I try to engage people and ask them about it, and they say, "Oh, we feel so safe. There's nothing wrong with it." So one thing that I'm trying to do is, to tell people not to view China with our own biases and our own perspective. Like, oh, we want, privacy and freedom of this and that, and they don't have it, and we criticize them. But no, let's not let our own biases influence our perspective. So my question is, how do you try to engage people in this country, when they raise all these negatives and criticisms? Do you have any suggestions or any strategies or tactics that have been helpful in terms of just kind of helping people open their eyes to look at China?
Yeah, like Michael said, it's definitely something I'm still navigating too. I've found, just engaging with people on a personal level, again, like saying, like showing that it's something that I'm passionate about, I'm interested in. And also getting the point across, I think, of a lot of what we've talked about here, like China has been at war, they understand conflict, and their people want a peaceful existence. They want a peaceful life. I found people have been somewhat receptive to me talking about that through more personal lens. I don't know about you, Michael.
Well, I think one way to go about it is to kind of try to change the kind of the default paradigm with which people approach this question, so that they see it as the most natural thing in the world for the United States to have bases all over Asia encircling China, as if the Pacific is an American lake, which it's not. And there's nothing natural about the United States doing that. But for most Americans, they just accept that unquestionably. And it's even the same thing. We have all these bases in Europe. What are we doing over there? Why do we have that? So, I think the fundamental core that is involved in this is for Americans to grasp their own society and what it's doing, to finally get both a recognition of the reality of imperialism and an understanding of what it actually is. And that is often lacking hugely in the American populace. I think it's a major reason why so few Americans really understand what's happening in Ukraine. And I think why many still don't understand what's happening in respect to Israel. it's kind of the missing piece in the puzzle in the American mind, even though, as my favorite American historian said, empire is as American as apple pie. And it's like the last thing a fish would come to understand or notice is water. I mean, we're swimming in our imperialist reality. It's everywhere. Cowboys and Indians, we grow up with it. And so it's hard for people to recognize. And I think that's a task that if you can accomplish that, it's a 2-for-1 or more than 2-for-1. If you can help people to understand American imperialism as a reality, then they're going to have the key, the hermeneutical key to grasping much of US foreign policy and what's happening in the world. So I would say that needs to be centered on. I also think that it needs to be communicated that without developing a cooperative relationship with China and essentially forsaking our imperialist ways, there's not much hope for humanity in terms of addressing climate change. So it's a vital interest to everyone.
Yeah, I think that's really key. Alice, did you have a question?
I don't know if it's a question, but I just think this has been the most extraordinary conversation. And for Americans, we're at a turning point. I mean, we're actually seeing the excesses of manifest destiny and imperialism and corporate patriarchy. We're seeing it. Our whole government is being ruined. I mean, like we have the president of the United States posing in a crown, calling himself the king. So, I mean, it's gotten to this point where I think we're at a wake-up time, and China is a good example for us. It's like we can see how a very big country was through cooperation. I mean, you're not allowed to say communism. That's like such a dirty word, but I mean, I've been talking about cooperation, communalism. I mean, we need a little communism. We just can't call it that. I mean, we have to learn.
Thank you, Mose. From
what they're doing, because we're on the wrong path, and it's going to hurt us the way we're going now. So China is a good example for us. And so is Russia, by the way. But we're demonizing Russia just the way we demonize China. And they have a long history of, wanting to cooperate. And they lost 27 million people during World War II. We were never hurt. We've been like, the only thing we had was the World Trade Center, and we did a whole war on terror from it.
Well, go ahead,
I think part of why we're such a violent society is because we don't understand what it's like to actually be dominated, to actually be colonized. I think
we have all these people living here that know it, are indigenous people. We're finally talking to them. We never even talk. I never even knew. I'm a New Yorker. I didn't know who the first people were. You know what I mean? It wasn't even part of my history who was here before me. Well, I learned when I was 80 years old.
In some ways, Elon Musk is sort of doing another 9/11.
Right.
It's not the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, but it's the Department of Education and all these other things that have been constructed and built for American society that is being destroyed. He reminds me very much of the IMF shock therapy, economic shock therapy, and the structural adjustment programs. In other words, the empire, as it declines, is coming home to roost big time. And so Americans are about to get a taste of what has been imposed by American power on on a good portion of mankind or humanity. And now it's being imposed on us.
And because we're learning from China and Russia and seeing these things, they have to press down even harder the corporate patriarchy. They're destroying more things. I mean, you can't destroy Social Security. That's everybody's parents. That's
apparently they think they can do anything to us, and we won't resist.
This will be the resistance now. It'll happen.
I think so.
And we have China to look at to teach us something.
Okay, Michael Lee, did you have a question also?
I was wondering if you thought like a trip like this is appropriate for just general visitors to China, or is it primarily for activists? And then also, like on these type of group trips, was there a way to facilitate more contact between people and residents in China?
Yeah, I would really like it if we had I would like a more emphasis upon talking to Chinese people. I think that would be really beneficial. In response to your other question, that's hard to know. Being an activist, I know how I experience things. I'm not sure how other folks would experience it, and I don't think a lot of Westerners go to the red history sites, but I don't really know that for sure, but we didn't see a lot when we were there. I don't
think we saw any really.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
yeah, once we got to Shanghai and Beijing, it was a different story. But yeah, down in Ruijin, we were the odd ones out for sure. But I still think there's so much to learn, and I don't think you have to be an activist to learn a lot from this. I think the main challenge is, finding a good tour guide, a good English speaking tour guide, probably. But I think anybody could benefit from a trip like this, really. Susan, did you have a question?
Well, again, just a comment if we have the time.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate what you guys did. I think that if you're thinking about enlightening others, I think just showing your direct experience there, picture of your guide and some of the places and what you learned from it and how you went in a little trepidatious. I know I say that because I do a lot of talks on China, and it's only from the perspective of an English teacher. And people are always amazed seeing it through my eyes that it's not the boogeyman like our news shows it to be. And I also subscribe to China Daily. It's an app on the phone, and every day I read speeches from Xi Jinping or just just the way the government's going with poverty and whatever. And it's very hopeful in the way they keep connecting with other countries, either through BRICS or, what they're doing to help with infrastructure. They're moving right along, right ahead. And you're right, they don't want war. And they've been there, done that. And they have the most varied diet in the world. Part of that's because during the revolution, people were starving to death. And so they started eating anything and everything, dogs or whatever. That's why they have the most varied diet. So anyways, there's a whole lot. PBS had a special on China, if anyone's interested. It's in a few different episodes. It might have been on their Frontline series.
I've been watching that.
Yeah, I think that's also very enlightening.
That's 100 Years of Revolution? Is that the series you're talking about?
It's like 3 2-hour programs.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
That one is fantastic. Or most of it is really, really good.
There's a little spin.
But yeah, it's really, really interesting.
That's it.
Any final words, Marcella or Michael, before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I feel like I got out a lot of it.
Well,
I probably could talk about this forever, but
Yeah, that's true. I think that one of the big obstacles is that Americans identify democracy with the specific form of democracy that the United States has had and still has, sort of. And the idea that there's different approaches to democracy, and to not just judge other people's and go, well, they don't have the forms that we have in our society, which aren't working very well, to say the least, and seem to be self-destructing. And to realize that there may be other paths to democracy that are different from the American. And maybe this crisis of American democracy will make Americans a little more reflective about that and realize that maybe we need to experiment with some different approaches to democracy in our country. I don't know. I think that's a huge issue because democracy is like a religion. That's the civic religion in the United States.
Thank you, Michael. Beautifully said. And from me, and I think from everyone here, we love you guys so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to us. And just what a beautiful treat to experience hearing your thoughts and your travels in Ruijin. And just so grateful for this discussion. So thank you both. And thank you to everyone for coming and for all the amazing, excellent questions. I hope everybody has a beautiful night, and I will send a follow-up email with more information about traveling to China and potential future webinars that we will have. So
Thank you, Megan, for coming up with the idea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. This was a lot
And
of
for-
fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for setting everything up and getting us all into this too.
Great.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.